And so the essence of this struggle is this. Just like in South Africa, the whole world eventually, ultimately recognized that this was true. South Africa did not have the right to exist as a racist, white supremacist, apartheid state.
That's right.
And I believe strongly, and USPCN believes, and so many millions of people around the world believe, that Israel also does not have the right to exist as a racist, white supremacist, apartheid, Zionist state.
Welcome to FightBack Radio, a production of FightBackNews.org, taking you to the heart of the people's struggle. I'm your host, Richard Berg, and our guest today is one of the most important Palestinians in the United States, I would argue. And his name is Hatem Abudayyeh, and he is the national chair of the United States Palestinian Community Network. And the reason Hatem's name is not a household word is because he speaks for the many, the overwhelming majority of Palestinians here in the United States and probably throughout the world. And he's not compromised, and so he's not a favorite on all the TV and radio shows, although he's been doing some of them lately. But he's been a tireless organizer of the protests that are going, along with others. I don't want to just put it all on him. So many people are working on this project, but he's been a leader, one of the main leaders, calling for the protests that have been happening in cities across the country. His organization and the so many wonderful organizers and hard workers at the United States Palestinian Community Network have done just tireless work over the decades, but also recently. And I encourage everybody, all of our Fight Back Radio listeners, to go to the website there, find a protest, go to it. It's at uspcn.org. Also, you can follow on FightBack News, which we're a production of FightBackNews.org. And it's reporting on this. We'll tell you more about what's going on and things develop in Palestine. And it's hard to get good news on this. It really is. I mean, it's the U.S. corporate media is often compromised, but on this issue, it is a monopoly almost, or near monopoly compromised. About Hatem, though, just to say, here's a guy who really walks the walk. I mean, he says, and you'll hear throughout this interview, you'll hear his emotion and his passion, but and he'll talk about, theoretically the relationships between the United States and Israel. This is just a fabulous interview. What a great guest to have at this time. But, he's paid a price for this besides not being famous, which I don't know if he cares about that or not. But, his home was raided by the FBI in 2006, along with others. They tried to, bring charges and grand jury and all this business. No charges were ever found. He doesn't do anything wrong except for speak out for an oppressed people. And in this country, that's becoming more and more of a criminal activity. But he's been doing this his entire adult life, and so he speaks with knowledge and experience about what's going on with the Palestinian people. You also hear him talk about some of the repression that's happening here in the United States. Here in Chicago, there was a young boy, 6 years old, in Plainfield, one of the suburbs of Chicago, who was murdered, stabbed 20-some times by a racist, Zionist, pro-Zionist person who was just all, built into a frenzy by some of what's going on in the world right now. And, his name was Wadia al-Fayoumi. And I might be a little off on the pronunciation or the accent, but it's a tragedy that this 6-year-old boy was killed like this, who was Palestinian, and his mother is, as we're going to releasing this episode, is fighting for her life. So our thoughts and prayers are with Hanan Shaheen Momame, and again, I may be killing the name, but it's so important. But we've seen at protests here. And Hatem talks about this, Zionists, pepper spraying the crowd. One guy shot a gun in the air. So these things are off the chain. Anyways, I want to allow you to hear the real expert, Hatem Abudayyeh. So here he is. So I'm here with Hatem Abudayyeh, who's the national chair of the United States Palestinian Community or Network. And, thanks for being on FightBack Radio, Hatem.
I appreciate it. It's been a while.
Yeah. So we're here, we're going to talk about the situation in Palestine. And, if you've been watching the TV or the newspapers or wherever you get your press, it's been mostly poisonous here in the United States. And the press tends to portray what's going on in Palestine right now is like Hamas attacked this sovereign country or whatever. And my question is first, is the resistance to the occupation in Palestine, just Hamas, or who makes, what does the resistance actually look like, and why did the attacks that happened just a little bit ago here, why did they happen?
So I think there's a lot of folks in the United States, especially, and I'm assuming that most of your audience is in the U.S. who were surprised on October 7th. They were surprised by the attack from the Palestinian resistance, and I think the number one thing to tell those folks is that they shouldn't have been surprised. Not only have the Palestinian people been living under brutal occupation and colonization for 75 years, but in the past few years, specifically with Netanyahu's most recent government, the Prime Minister of Israel, and the fact that the government has become even more rabid right-wing Zionists, that the settler movement, the illegal settler movement these are the white supremacists in Israel. These are the racist white supremacists. You talk about the MAGA supporters in the United States. This is, MAGA supporters in Israel to the 10th power. Vicious settler movement that is armed, that is protected by the Israeli military, and they were on a rampage. They were attacking Palestinian cities and villages. They were burning homes. They were burning cars. They were burning olive groves and fields, attacking people in the streets, killing them in the streets. And again, under the cover of the Israeli military and almost with impunity. People were not getting charged or indicted for those crimes. They were not getting, sentenced for crimes against the Palestinian people. So you're living under this vicious occupation, military occupation, that is illegal under international law. And the Israelis control all of your movement. From the West Bank to Jerusalem, you cannot go. From Jerusalem to the West Bank, you cannot go. Nobody could get in and out of Gaza. For 16 years, a criminal siege on Gaza. There are checkpoints all over the West Bank. And there's, a regular attempt to expropriate land, to steal land, to push people out of their homes, especially in the Jerusalem area. Israel has a policy of trying to Judaize the entirety of Jerusalem, push as many Palestinians out of the East Jerusalem area as possible. And that's what they were doing in places like Sheikh Jarrah and other villages, neighborhoods of Jerusalem. Settlers were attacking. The military was attacking. The military was attacking worshipers in mosques and churches in Jerusalem. This was a heightened rampage from the military, a heightened rampage from the settlers. And the resistance warned Israel and warned the United States and warned the world that if nobody's going to do anything about this rampage and this offensive from Israel, we are going to have to do it ourselves. And that's why we call this self-defense. That's why we call this a legitimate resistance to illegal occupation, to colonization. And, it's not just one organization. The Palestinian unified resistance under a unified military command, under a unified political command, is made up of all of the political parties in Palestine, all of the ideological trends in Palestine, all of the social sectors of Palestinian society. So yes, Hamas is the strongest probably today militarily, but the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine is a part of that resistance. The Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Jihad and Hamas are stronger in Gaza than the other forces. Fatah is there as well. All of the political forces and all of the military forces together defending the people of Palestine, defending the people of Gaza, defending the people of Jerusalem, defending Palestinians inside the 1948 territories as well. Those that live inside of quote unquote Israel, who are Palestinians who did not leave during the Nakba in 1948, the exile, who lived there as second and third class citizens. They are represented by the resistance as well. And so all of those folks who want to simplify this, call it criminal, the response, we call it self-defense. They want to call it Israel versus Hamas. That's not at all what it is. It's Israel attacking the whole of the Palestinian people, and the entirety of the Palestinian people, represented by their unified resistance, are fighting back, are defending their land. And not only do you have that moral right to do it, a moral imperative, a moral responsibility, you're protected by international law as well. Geneva Conventions say that an occupied people have the right to resist by any means necessary, including armed struggle. 2 specific UN General Assembly resolutions speak to the right of people under occupation to fight back and to defend their lands and to defend themselves. So there's nothing illegal about Palestinian resistance. It's the reason why not only is it supported almost, unequivocally by the Palestinian people, it's supported across the world, right?
Yes.
And that's the reality of what happened on October 7th and what we're still seeing, 2 weeks later.
Could you talk a little more about, because what you were talking about of the ramping up of the oppression and some of with the settlers and what was happening in Jerusalem, that doesn't come across here. It was like, in the press from the United States, if you're that's you hear that Hamas just attacked Israel and contrary to what you just said. But could you talk a little bit more, like, obviously it started probably in 1948 or even before that, but more recently you seem to be indicating that there was these warnings, and could you talk a little bit about what's happened in the recent past and what the oppressions looked like and how they ramped it up?
Yeah, I think there's a general oppression and repression that the Palestinian people have been living under for a long, long time. So I talked about it a little bit already. Like, this is, the checkpoints and the restriction on movement is like, Exhibit A in terms of what occupation is. So the Israelis have established this very intricate system of making sure that, Palestinians live in Bantustans and in these sections of the West Bank in which they're closed off from each other, just like in South Africa. Yeah. It is the reason why, we have called it apartheid for decades. Of course, the world doesn't call it apartheid until the white human rights organizations call it apartheid. But we've been calling it apartheid for decades, right? But then all of a sudden, Human Rights Watch is calling it apartheid. Amnesty International is calling it apartheid. You lent me your book that Jimmy Carter wrote.
Yes.
Right? Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid. And he was calling it apartheid. And all of a sudden, the world is calling it apartheid. But that's really what it is. Palestinians in these areas of the West Bank in which they have no control over their own lives, that the Israelis control most of the security there. The Israelis are militarily occupying. They have tanks and soldiers everywhere at every checkpoint. A trip from one area of the West Bank to Jerusalem, my home village, for example, my parents' home village called Al-Jib, to Jerusalem is a 15-minute drive, usually 20 minutes at the most, and under occupation with all the checkpoints that you have to stop at and all, it takes 2-3 hours. So the economy is devastated because of this restriction on movement. People have no freedom to protest their conditions, because if you're a protester there, they grab you, the Israelis, and they put you in prison. There's over 5,000 political prisoners, probably way more now since October 7th, because they've been on a rampage in the West Bank as well. And they've killed Palestinians in the West Bank also, besides the 5,500 people who have been killed in Gaza, including 2,500 of them who are children. 700 people have died just in the last 24 hours, have been killed just in the last 24 hours, is according to the Gaza Ministry of Health. And so you live those conditions. You can't get into Jerusalem, the capital, not just the political capital of Palestine, but the cultural capital, the emotional capital, the psychological capital. My father and my mother talked about how Jerusalem was the center in all of these different ways. If you're in the West Bank, you can't go there. If you're in the south of the West Bank, in Hebron, for example, Khalil, we call it in Arabic, surrounded by settlers, the most rabid, the most right-wing of the settlers, who believe all of Palestine belongs to them. And they attack people in Khalil all the time. And the Israelis allow them to do it all the time. And so those are the conditions that we saw in normal days. But in the last 3-4 years, that has all heightened because there's been a shift in Israeli society, a shift in Israeli politics. Always been right-wing, but now it's even worse. It's the most right-wing government we've ever seen. Netanyahu had to forge a unity government by joining with the most right-wing, anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian, anti-Muslim, racist, white supremacist parties. And that's what their society looks like. So when folks talk about like resistance within Israel, I want to know where that is, who that is. When they were protesting Netanyahu for his corruption, and they were protesting Netanyahu because of the judicial reforms he was trying to implement, there was very little of that protest that talked about the Palestinians, that talked about occupation, that talked about colonization. So like there is no anti-apartheid movement in Israel. There is no a real anti-occupation movement in Israel. Yeah, of course there's individuals, a couple small groups, very marginal, that sort of thing. This is an entire society that kind of looks like, MAGA supporters in the United States. And they're armed. They're all soldiers. All the people in the settlements are armed, and they get to attack Palestinians in the streets all the time.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. So, on the October 7th, or even before that, some of the repression leading up to that came from the settlers. Again, the press here talks about how they pitted as Hamas attacking innocent people and killing children, and it's things like that. That's the portraits you can turn on CNN or MSNBC or whatever your favorite channel is, and that's what it'll show you right now as we're talking here on October 25th.
Listen, Richard, they were building support for the war, right? Not only the Israeli media, not only the Israeli military, but the U.S. media and the U.S. military and the U.S. government as well. They're building support for the war, right? Building support for the war by telling stories that ended up being debunked. A lot of media reports that ended up being debunked. But to be honest, the dilemma is that when those things were said and those lies were spoken, including in the city council, it had already been
here
debunked.
in
Chicago. It had already been debunked. This idea that there was a massacre of children, it had been debunked. The journalist who made the report said, "I never saw it. I was told it by the military, right? And people like the alderwoman who
Silverstein,
who put the pro-Israel resolution, unequivocal support of Israel, unequivocal condemnation of the Palestinians, spoke about it from the floor of the Chicago City Council. Even though she must have known it was debunked. She must have known it was a lie. The damn journalist that reported it said it was a lie, right? Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that's super, super dangerous. I should have said this when we were at Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky's last week. We took over her office, USPCN, the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. I know you've had Frank Chapman on a few times. His folks were with us. Dissenters, Jewish Voice for Peace, a number of organizations. We shut down her office. And what Schakowsky has said, what Silverstein has said, what a lot of legislators have said, and press, and, Zionist organizations, they've compared the resistance and the self-defense and the attacks on Israel as being comparable to what happened during the Holocaust. And that's super, super dangerous, because when you say that, understand what you're saying. You're saying that the Palestinians are defending themselves and attacked some sections of the Israeli military and Israeli armed settlers and that sort of thing because they are Jewish. That's what Schakowsky's trying to say. That's what Silverstein's trying to say. That's what Pritzker's trying to say. That's what Durbin and Duckworth and
these are all the Illinois politicians.
Yeah, Durbin and Duckworth are the U.S. senators from Illinois. J.B. Pritzker is the governor of Illinois. Jan Schakowsky is a congresswoman here, 79 years old, has been in Congress for decades, considers herself a progressive, and is good on the issues that we care about.
Our last guest was the chairman of the Philippine Trade Union Center, the KMU, and they're promoting a bill in Congress that she's sponsoring for Philippine human rights and whatever. So
yeah. And she's good on some issues that we care about. Yeah. She's good on women's rights. She's good on labor. She's good on immigrant rights. But she is what we call progressive, except for Palestine. Because when it comes to Palestine, she's unequivocally supportive of Israel, and she unequivocally condemned the Palestinians when they were trying to defend themselves. And so that's dangerous. And to me, it's not only dangerous in and of itself as political rhetoric, it's dangerous because it causes backlash against our community. Because it's saying to the world that the Palestinians attacked because those people are Jewish. And that's absolutely, absolutely wrong. It's absolutely incorrect, factually incorrect. They were defending their homes, defending their people, defending their land, and it had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that they were Jewish. It had to do with the fact that for 75 years, they've been causing the worst kind of oppression against Palestinians. Murder and injuries and political imprisonment and home demolitions and stealing of land. That's what it means to live under occupation. And the Palestinians, if there's nobody else to defend them, and they're asking for redress in the UN and other international bodies, and the strongest country in the history of the world, the empire called the United States, gives $5 billion a year of military aid to Israel to do those things to the Palestinians. Who is supposed to defend you if you're not going to defend yourself?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, let me ask you though. Also, I mean, it's like in the region, there's support beyond Palestine too for the Palestinians, and some of that's been attacked. I know the Israelis have bombed Syria. There's been skirmishes with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and threats for sure against Lebanon. And there's a discussion in the press, which I don't know what to say about the press because we just condemned it, but about the war expanding to potentially Syria, Lebanon, Iran is probably the big one. I've heard Yemen mentioned, but then also there's countries that whatever, like Egypt, that historically supported the Palestinians but then didn't. And so how do you view what's going on in the region around Palestine? And do you expect do you expect things to expand, or how do you think this will play out?
Yeah. So I mean, listen, the countries that you mentioned, are part of the axis of resistance, we call it, right? So that's Syria and Lebanon, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Syrian government and Syrian Arab army that has been under attack themselves for many, many years. Again, U.S. trying to unseat the president of Syria, but also take away the people's sovereignty. That's what has been happening in Syria. Clearly, there's a ton of evidence. Seymour Hersh and so many other journalists that people should pay attention to have written about that evidence in which the U.S., Turkey, some Gulf countries supporting these militant groups that have been attacking the Syrian Arab army and the government of Syria for many, many years now. And the Syrians have been steadfast, and the Syrians have resisted, and the Syrians have become victorious ultimately. And so there should be no surprise, again, that the Syrians and the Lebanese resistance, represented by Hezbollah mostly, and Iran and its support for Lebanon and for Syria, that they would line up with the Palestinians and with their resistance. There's no surprise about that. You shouldn't be surprised that the vast majority of the Arab masses are going to be on the side of the Palestinians as well. Hundreds of thousands in London, of course, hundreds of thousands in the United States, but, millions in the Arab world, in Yemen and Jordan, and even the countries that have peace treaties with Israel, and that we would consider part of the reactionary axis, Jordan, Egypt, Gulf states, that sort of thing, massive protests in support of Palestine. Yemen, of course, beautiful protests in Yemen and Amman, Jordan, and Lebanon and Syria and everywhere. So, and this is not just the Arab world, right? The Arab world, it would be understandable, the brethren, the Palestinians are Arabs, the Muslim world, even the majority, a good number of Palestinians are Muslim, also a good number Christian too, but a good number of Muslims. So people from the Muslim world see an affinity with the Palestinians. They see Jerusalem as being, the capital on some level, not just a political capital for Palestine, but also, a very sacred place for Muslims and Christians. And so there's that support, of course, in the Arab world and the Muslim world, but the support is everywhere. It's across the entirety of the world. Millions and millions of people in the streets in Africa and Latin America and Europe, in the United States and everywhere. They support Palestinians and Palestinian rights and Palestinian self-defense, really, because they recognize what this is. It's a battle against white settler colonialism. That's what it is, right? Let's, we call it what it is,
No, that's right.
We see, we remember, it's in our consciousness as Arabs, even Arab Americans, the heroic Algerians fighting for their independence from France. 1 million were martyred. 1 million Algerians lost their lives before they were able to win their independence from France. 2 million Vietnamese lost their lives before they were able to win their independence from the U.S. and from France. And people see the Palestinian struggle in that context. Yeah. It is a battle for national liberation. It's a battle for independence. It's a battle against racism and white supremacy and settler colonialism, because Israel is a settler colonial state. Yeah. Make no mistake, it's white Europeans who came to this country because the British wanted a stronghold in the Arab world to control the Arab masses, to control Arab resources, natural resources, and human resources. Later, after World War II, the power shifted and it became the United States that became the strongest imperialist country in the world. And then the United States became the main patron to Israel. But wanting to support Israel, needing Israel to be strong there for the same exact reason.
Well, let's go there for a second. So, you've talked about the billions of dollars that Biden's wants to send to Israel, and this has been my whole life. I think there's been billions of dollars every year going to Israel and financing them. Here in the United States, many of us, we're fighting against homelessness. Some of the, people could, healthcare is in crisis in the United States. I can think of a lot of things we could spend.
Education,
yeah, right. I'm from Chicago Teachers Union.
That's right. Yes,
so yes, we can think of ways to spend this money. But why is the United States supporting Israel? Why do they? What's in it for them? And why? And it's not whatever. It's Biden. It's Trump. It seems like it's all of them.
It doesn't matter.
Jan Schakowsky,
you're a Democrat or Republican, right?
DeSantis. Yeah, whatever. Right, it's like the whole range.
Listen. This is a good lesson in understanding, the basics of U.S. imperialism. It's a good lesson in understanding the basics of white settler colonialism. This is the essence. And I'll tell you, I like talking about this because I think that there's a lot of times there's a misunderstanding about the relationship between the United States and Israel. I think most Palestinians get it. But I think there are some that don't, and people who are with us, supportive of the Palestinian people and the Palestinian rights and Palestinian resistance and our self-defense and all of that sort of thing, who don't fully grasp that relationship correctly. And I think it's really important to grasp it correctly, because then you know who your target is when you're doing your organizing. And so the analysis here is that, yes, the Zionist movement in the United States is strong. And yes, the Israel lobby in the United States is strong. But if anybody thinks that it's the Israel lobby and the Zionist movement that makes foreign policy for the United States, they're wrong. That's the essence of it. And those people in our community and others who think that it's white American Jews and American Zionists who are making policy for the United States, and the United States would not be so supportive of Israel if it weren't for the internal pressure from the Zionists and that community, are wrong. They're strong. They put pressure on the U.S. government, that's for sure, right? Mm-hmm. But the reason they do it is for their own self-interest, the self-interest of the imperialists, the self-interest of the empire, the self-interest of the big business that benefits from being able to export its capital to other countries and to be able to control.
You're talking about the 1%. You're not talking about the guy who sweeping the floors.
Of course. We're talking about the richest of the rich in this country, who are represented by these legislators who they represent the richest of the rich. Mm-hmm. And so the United States decided, after they became the strongest power in the world, because of World War II and Great Britain getting, devastated in that war, they decided that we needed to be the main patron, main supporter of Israel, because we will build up Israel. We will make sure they have all the weapons they need. We will make sure they have all the financial and military aid that they need. We will make sure that they keep the Palestinian people down and that there's no Palestinian revolution there, that we keep moving white European settlers there, and so that we can control the Arab masses generally, make Israel as strong as possible, so that if by any chance there's an uprising in Egypt or in Syria or in Lebanon or in any of the countries that have governments that are supportive of the United States, that the United States, has installed puppet leadership in and that sort of thing. That's how they've controlled the Arab world. Puppet leadership in the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, of course, and other countries. Peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan, and Israel being there as the watchdog. as the watchdog for U.S. interests in the region. So when you know that, then the Palestinians can understand who the targets are, who the enemies are.
So this is all about profits and resource, probably mostly oil, but other things as well.
Mostly oil. Of course it's mostly oil, right? So in Iraq, for example, the U.S. had to actually go there themselves, and they bombed and they invaded to make sure that they were going to be able to control that oil and that it didn't go to Russia or to Germany. There were contracts right before the war in Iraq that Germany and Russia were ready to sign massive oil contracts with Iraq, and then the war starts. The U.S. essentially ends up controlling that oil, and those contracts don't get signed. So the U.S. benefits, makes those super profits. They need Israel there for that reason, and that's why we, understanding that this is the relationship, realize that U.S. empire is an enemy and a target as well. It's the reason why we build the relationships that we do with other oppressed nations and other oppressed communities in the U.S. We have a great relationship with the Black community in Chicago. I talked about the Chicago Alliance earlier, with BLM in Chicago, with Soul, with STOP, with Good Kids Mad City, all of these Black organizations in which we work shoulder to shoulder on issues that we all collectively care about: police accountability, schools, healthcare, mental health clinics, all that sort of thing. And those are our alliances. It's not like thinking that Dick Durbin is going to get us what we want. We know who Dick Durbin is because I just explained it. These legislators who are the ones who represent big business in this country need Israel to do its bidding in the Arab world. And so that's why we don't expect Dick Durbin to be on our side. That's why he's our enemy. Whereas some other forces in our community believe that, no, the United States could shift its policy if we just struggle with them to understand why they should be supporting the Palestinian people. They don't support the Palestinian people because they need Israel to be there and to do its bidding. And that's the relationship. It's the reason why those people are our targets and our enemies as well. It's why we're going after all of these legislators for their unequivocal support of Israel.
So let me go back to you. You talked a little bit about the coalition that you're and the people you're working with here, and so you're the national chair of the United States Palestinian Community Network. And tell me if I got this right. So your strategy is basically to pull all oppressed people in the United States together. So in this case, Black people who are being oppressed, or Latinos, or whoever, and to try to pull them together to fight for justice, in Palestine, but also justice, it's solidarity, that you support each other, and that by putting together the power of the people, that you can actually make some kind of change for justice, or lessen the amount of oppression. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think again, if you recognize that the enemy is the U.S. empire, as well as Arab reactionary countries. The reactionary countries, we talk about the ones that are sold out already in support of the U.S. and Israel, who are dictators to their own people: Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, a lot of other Gulf states. Those are what we call the Arab reactionary countries. And then, of course, Israel and international Zionist movement. The three-headed beast, the three-headed enemy. When you understand that, then you know that, where do I have to do my organizing in the United States? My organizing in the United States, USPCN's organizing in the United States, is different than the organizing of Palestinians in Palestine, of course. They have their own conditions. They have to fight for their self-defense. They have to organize the way they do, and we do it differently here. And so if you understand the analysis well enough, and we hope that people are starting to learn it a little bit more, because of some of the education that we do and the work of all of our communities, Palestinian and Arab and other like solidarity communities around the country, then you realize that like, how are you going to strike a blow, as we say, against this government and this enemy that will ultimately help your people win their liberation, right? That's the essence of it. And so how do you do that? You have to unite with the other communities in the United States to transform society here. And who are those communities? They're the Latinx community, broader immigrant community, the Black community, of course, the Black liberation movement, other progressive and social justice movements. And that's why progressive Palestinian organizations like USPCN, those that would be considered, on the left in the spectrum of the different Palestinian organizations in the U.S., have that perspective and have that strategy. And, we built this concept of Black Palestinian solidarity in this country, and nowhere is it more apparent and nowhere is it more clear that this is, a powerful relationship in this country than it is in Chicago, I think.
No, I see it. I see it at your rallies. You mentioned the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression speakers, and they're sitting at Jan Schakowsky's office, Congresswoman. They were there as well as others. And it's impressive that you've been able to pull together that kind of broad unity across different oppressed nationality peoples. Can you talk a little bit about your support a little bit more? You mentioned it, but your support for the Black liberation movement, and how you do that, and what that organizing Palestinians or other.
Yeah, I mean,
Arabs.
listen, that's the essence of this thing. Like we haven't done this work alone. And we haven't really even spearheaded it, my mentors in Chicago who led the Palestine National Movement, the Palestinian Liberation Movement, for years, starting in the 70s, they were friends and contemporaries of my parents. And they ultimately, some of them became my own mentors. The reason why, I believe in what I believe, and the reason why USPCN, I think, is the organization that it is because there's a rich history of progressive Palestinians and Arabs in this country who have always worked with other communities like that, Black liberation, Puerto Rican independence, Native American sovereignty, immigrant rights, all of those communities. And so we also have a perspective as USPCN that says the most important social movement in the United States today is the Black liberation movement. And understanding that the power of that movement, we saw it during the George Floyd uprising. We saw it during the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s. We saw it during the Black Power and Black liberation heyday in the 70s. That was the movement that could, not by itself, but would lead the transformation of society here. We recognize that. Not only do we recognize, do we unite with them because we know that they're a viciously oppressed community, but we unite with them because they are a community that could be the leadership of what a transformation of society, a revolution, if you will, in this country. That's our analysis. We've said it for a long, long time. Black liberation leads to liberation for all. It's the reason why, folks at Chicago, especially USPCN, follow Frank Chapman so closely in the Chicago Alliance. Like, we've read his books, we listen to his analysis, we try to understand his theories and his ideology and his philosophy, and it's important stuff to learn. The history of the Black liberation movement in this country, that he's the living history, that man, right? And that's the reason why we unite with them. And so we've been out ever since, way before this, of course, but in my head, I'm talking about trying to establish like a timeline. It's Trayvon Martin murder.
Yeah.
Is when I believe Frank first came to Chicago, right around that time, a little bit or before that, I think. And all of a sudden he's rebuilding the Chicago Alliance and the National Alliance. and all of a sudden we're building relationships with his organization, and we probably went to the first town hall meetings that talked about police crimes, right? Stop Police Crimes Committee. We joined from the very beginning. I'm a member of the leadership body of the Chicago Alliance.
Yeah.
And our organizations, the United States Palestinian Community Network, some of the community-based organizations, include the Arab American Action Network, are part of those alliances. We've marched shoulder to shoulder, and it's been reciprocal.
Yep.
Right. Rasmiya Oda, another mentor of mine, who was a colleague of mine at the Arab American Action Network, ends up getting arrested in 2013 on a phony immigration charge. She was attacked because she's an icon in the Palestine support movement and the Palestine liberation movement. And the people that were there with us from day one, every court hearing in Detroit, the full week of the trial in Detroit, every protest and rally in Chicago in support of her, was the Chicago Alliance. Would bring a dozen to 24 people to Detroit every time we went there together.
That's impressive.
And that's real solidarity. That's like material solidarity. Like, they're doing the work. And we went to, all of the black neighborhoods in the South Side and the West Side to support the families that had people who were killed by the cops or oppressed by the cops or injured by the cops. And, that's what this alliance and this solidarity and this movement building work means to us. Why it's important theoretically and why it's important on the practical level as well. It's not just unity in thought, it's unity in action. I think that might be another Frank Chapman quote.
Those are all impressive. And for those of you who are new to FightBack Radio, Frank Chapman's been a regular guest here, and he's been, we had him talking about, he's written 2 books. We had him talk about both of them. And so let me ask you a little bit about, some other sectors. And, recently it came to my attention today that, down in Florida, they're trying to criminalize some of the student activity that's going on with the Students for Justice in Palestine. And today, it's October 25th, there was a national march on campuses across the country and walkouts, here in Chicago. I know at several of the campuses, UIC, Loyola, and some others, around support for the Palestinian cause. Can you talk a little bit about the student movement and what's going on in Palestine now and the relationship you at USPCN have to them?
Yeah. I think it's a good segue too, because I want to talk about the repression of the student movement, but I want to talk about the attacks on the community more generally as well.
Yeah, but why don't you take this opportunity to both?
Yeah, I think this is a good place for that, because the last 5 days have been really a huge upsurge in the organizing in Chicago. So, of course, since October 7th, there have been mass protests. The first Wednesday after the attacks by Israel, we had 5,000. That Saturday, we had 10. Mm-hmm. The Saturday after, we had 15. And all of a sudden, these are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah. Mass marches and rallies, right? And part of what was happening at the same time is that because of what I talked about earlier, I named a number of legislators that maybe not your entire audience knows, because this goes way beyond Chicago. But I just want to read a couple quotes from a couple of these legislators that I think are important to talk about this repression.
Sure, please.
And then what it led to. So USPCN has been trying to put out, not only this great community organizing work that we're leading. We're one of the leading forces within the Chicago Coalition for Justice in Palestine with a bunch of other Palestinian organizations, but also like advanced action. So last Thursday, we took over Jan Schakowsky's office, and because she considers herself a progressive, and we say you're not a progressive if you're going to condemn the Palestinians the way you do. She said, "Our alliance with Israel is unbreakable. Our commitment to Israel's security is ironclad. We will do all we can to ensure Israel has the ability and capacity to restore and maintain its security and safety of all its citizens. Pritzker said, the governor of Illinois, there's no immediate threat that the FBI or law enforcement has detected here. He meant Illinois, right? But they are remaining vigilant, as should all of you. And we're going to work with all of our Zionist partners.
Wow.
You know, he didn't say Zionist, but that's what he meant. Our American white Jewish organizations, the majority of the biggest ones are Zionists. We're going to work with our Zionist partners and law enforcement to make sure that everybody's safe. What does that say to the community, right?
Oh my God.
It says that you have Palestinians in your midst who are your neighbors. You have Arabs in your midst who are your neighbors. You have Muslims in your midst who are your neighbors, right? And that is the local face to the enemy abroad. The enemy we have already established is the Palestinians. And this is the local face of the enemy abroad. And so it might only be semantics. It might only be rhetoric. But the kind of rhetoric it is incitement.
Yeah.
And it has incited.
Yes.
Because then a 6-year-old boy, a beautiful 6-year-old baby boy, a Palestinian, is stabbed and killed. Stabbed 26 times and killed by a white racist. Jan Schakowsky, Governor Pritzker, and Joe Biden, we're going to work again with our Zionist community partners to identify and disrupt any domestic threat that could emerge in connection with these attacks by the Palestinians. So he is even saying, the President of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, is saying, be careful of your neighbors. So he's got blood on his hands. And Pritzker's got blood on his hands. And Jan Schakowsky's got blood on her hands. And they're responsible for the murder of that baby boy. And then that language allows Sunday night, we're protesting these Zionist organizations. Because if you're doing a rally for Israel right now, while 5,000 Palestinians are being murdered in a genocide, in a massacre, right?
Yes.
2,500 of them are genocide. Children. If you're rallying in support of Israel, what are you rallying for? You're rallying in support of murder, in support of war crimes, in support of genocide. That's what you're doing.
No, absolutely.
So we will never allow that. And us and the Alliance united to protest those Zionist organizations. And the Zionists who came out of that building after rallying in support of war and genocide attacked our peaceful protest. Excuse me. They attacked us with pepper spray, injured about 10, maybe 15 people, including a police officer. One of them, a Zionist supporter of Israel, pulled out a gun and fired it in the air. That guy actually got sent home and not charged. And we've got a campaign against the Cook County State's Attorney's Office to make sure that guy gets charged. And it's all over the place. We're having everybody call Kim Fox, who's the state's attorney, and other people in her office to make sure that they reconsider.
It's the prosecutor in the Cook County, the Chicago area.
And her office makes the decision that they were let this guy go. I believe because of the pressure that we put on them to reconsider and to charge the other guy with the gun, they realize, oh goodness, we better not let this guy with the pepper spray go. And so they did charge him. Aggravated assault or aggravated battery plus a hate crime enhancement. So we felt like that was a little bit of a victory.
No,
it was community organizing, and the hashtag organizing works, and everybody's saying organizing works because it does, right?
No, it makes a difference.
And organizing works with Schakowsky because since that time we took over her office, we have heard through the grapevine her talking to other people in the community, other progressives that we know and we have relationships with, that she's very, very upset, and she's very, very conscious and cognizant of the fact that we're not going to let her off the hook. We can't let her off the hook. You can't say we're in unequivocal support of Israel right now. You should never have said it. But right now, while a massacre is going on, while a genocide is going on, you're responsible.
Yeah.
especially if you're the U.S. You think Joe Biden can't stop Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli military right this second if he wanted to?
No, I'm sure.
Of course. And Dick Durbin, the second most powerful senator in the country, could not do that right now if he wanted to?
No, absolutely.
Of course they could.
Yeah.
And so this repression is real, and it ends up manifesting itself on attacks on the community. This beautiful baby boy, our protests, attacks on protests in Seattle, pro-Palestinian protests, Seattle, New York, Minnesota. We have partners in Minnesota with the Anti-War Committee. I don't know if you've had any of them on your show yet, but they had a protest. They've done almost as many as Chicago, almost as big. They took over McCollum's office, Betty McCollum, who's a congresswoman there, who actually has a bill in Congress that we support.
Wow.
H.R. 3103. And it's the Palestinian Children and Families Act. And we support it. And we have supported it for a number of years. She just reintroduced it to the new Congress this year. But guess what? She came out in support of Israel when this thing started on October 7th. And the Anti-War Committee, who also supports the bill, said, we're not going to allow her to do that. You have to be a principled supporter of Palestinians. And they're taking over her office. They're probably still there right this second. And so it manifests, and it's these attacks.
No one gets it. None of the politicians, none of the rich people in Pritzker is part of the 1%.
Absolutely.
So none of these people get Hyatt Regency, our governor.
They don't get a pass.
One of the
they don't get a pass, right? So the Zionists attacked this protest in Minnesota a few days ago. They attacked our protest. They attacked a protest in New York. Military-grade pepper spray was sprayed at our protesters. Military-grade pepper spray was sprayed at the protesters in Los Angeles. In Seattle, attack on protesters in Seattle. It's happening everywhere. So what does it mean? It also means that the Israelis who are losing in Palestine, who have not been able to go, you talked about like the dynamic of the Arab world and the resistance and what's happening even on the military side. I'm not a military expert, but I do know one thing. They wanted to go in with ground troops days ago. Yeah. But they brought up 300,000 reservists, and they're on the border of Gaza, and they want to go into Gaza. But they know that they've got their hands full if they go into Gaza. Hand-to-hand combat, house-to-house combat. That's why they've wiped out entire neighborhoods, taken down entire sections of residential buildings, bombed churches, right? And hospitals as well.
Because they were part of that neighborhood. They had to wipe out everything.
Trying to wipe everything out so that they could make space for the ground engagement and the ground invasion, but they haven't gone in yet. And even Israeli military analysts are saying it's not going to be that easy. Not only because of the Gazan resistance, the unified resistance that we talked about, from the left to the right and everybody in between, but also the fact that they don't want to leave the northern front exposed. Because if they try to go in a ground invasion on Gaza and they're bogged down there, then you've got Lebanon that is committed, Hezbollah and the Lebanese resistance committed to Palestinian national liberation as well, because they know Palestinian national liberation leads to the liberation of all Arab peoples, just like black liberation in this country leads to the liberation of everybody in the world. And so that's those are all of these things are connected, of course. And Israel's in crisis. Political crisis, military crisis, it's manifesting itself here. They're attacking people in the streets. And we've got brave young men, young women, older men, older women, whatever gender they are. We've got brave people in our community. Yes. The people that support us, being able to stand their ground and be steadfast and hold their ground against those Zionist attackers. And we're going to continue to do it. It's not going to keep one person from going to the next protest what happened in Skokie. Because they saw us, not only did we stand our ground that day, but they also saw us fight back by doing the press work, talking about the racist attacks, going after the state's attorney's office to make sure that those people got charged. That's what we do as an organization. That's what we do as a community. And with the support of the Chicago Alliance and our other black partners and immigrant rights partners and other institutions. I mean, we know that we're going to win because we have those relationships, we have those partners, and we have, that we have history and right on our side.
So for our Fight Back Radio listeners, if they want to support what you guys are doing, and we can put whatever you tell us in the show notes as well, if there's links or anything like that. But how can a Fight Back Radio listener from around the United States, wherever they are, support the USPCN and what you're trying to do to support the people of Palestine?
All of this discussion is really, it went well, I think, and it's really connected, right? We talk about the relationship between the United States and Israel so that people in the United States know what they can do, right? The protests and the rallies and the marches and the shutting down of the big cities in New York, Brooklyn, and Chicago, and LA, and San Fran, and all of it is beautiful, right? And people should continue to go out. We have another protest in a few days. There's a national mobilization in which we are one of the co-convening organizations, USPCN, November 4th, 2 p.m. Eastern at the White House. It's online. There's a Facebook page for it. People should go there and try to get to DC.
Okay.
If you follow us on social media and our website, you'll get all the information about everything happening in Chicago, in the Bay Area, in LA, in Detroit, in New York, in Ohio, all the places where we have chapters and members and that sort of thing. So go out to all the protests, but we also need you to do the other thing, which is hit the other enemy, which is go to your congressperson and tell that person, we need you to sign the Cori Bush resolution. The Cori Bush resolution is the one that says that Israel must stop its bombing immediately.
Okay.
And allow aid to go into Gaza immediately, because one of the things we talked about is that there's a siege on Gaza and it's 16 years long, but we didn't really say what that meant.
Good.
What it means is that the Israelis cut food, cut fuel, cut water, cut electricity. All of it. Not one iota had gotten in since October 7th until a couple of days ago.
Right.
550 trucks of supplies that go into Gaza every single day on a normal day. Since they opened a little bit of the aid, 20 trucks have been going into Gaza.
Oh my God.
Right. This is after the massacre of 5,000 people, 2,500 of them children.
So there's starving people and, dying of thirst or of electricity if you're in a hospital or need anything to, so much of our medical care is tied to electricity.
There's reports coming from the Gaza Ministry of Health, from the UN, from all of these, international agencies that are saying that there's dozens and dozens of babies that are going to die in those hospitals because of the lack of electricity. And the Minister of Defense on the first day said that those people are human animals. So we're going to siege.
Racist.
Yeah. We're going to continue this siege. We're going to starve them. And we're going to bomb them mercilessly. And that's what they've been doing. And they even said, remember when they were preparing for the invasion, they said, everybody move. 1 million people we want to move from the north to the south with, after demolishing so much of the infrastructure already, right? And while there was one occurrence in which while they were moving, some of them were moving. A lot of people said, we're not going anywhere. Where are we going to go? We've been refugees twice already. And there's no room anywhere else in this Gaza Strip. We can't get out. If you open the opening to Egypt, which Egypt tried to do, the Israelis bombed the Rafah crossing. And when they had people move from the north to the south, while they were moving, they bombed the people that were trying to move. I mean, this is vicious, criminal stuff.
Yeah. And
anybody who's supporting it, any legislator, any press person, any individual, Zionist or not, who's supporting it is a criminal as well. That's why everybody is so passionate about who the enemy is right now. That's why when Tammy Duckworth, the U.S. Senator, came to the mosque in Bridgeville, Illinois, to quote unquote pay her respects for the baby that was killed, we don't need any crocodile tears from those people. We don't want them. When I talked to Jan Schakowsky, when we, USPCN, talked to Jan Schakowsky on the phone, when we took over her office, and we said, you cannot unequivocally support Israel at this moment. You cannot unequivocally condemn Palestine at this moment because look at what's happening. Look at the massacres. Look at the genocide. Immediately, her response was, do you know how much I've been trying to work to get aid to the Gazans, to the Palestinians? We don't want your charity. The Palestinians are a proud, proud people. They don't want U.S. grain and rice while U.S. bombs are falling on their heads. We don't want that. We want you to stop the bombing. That's your responsibility, Jan Schakowsky, not to try to give us, your charity.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Fuck that shit.
So, that's okay. We're an adult
radio.
We're an adult podcast here. So FightBack Radio listeners, talk to your congressperson. Tell them
the Cori Bush resolution specifically, stop the massacre by Israel, open up Gaza to aid and support to keep those families and those people alive. Go to every protest that you can possibly go to. Talk to your neighbors, talk to your schoolmates, talk to your coworkers, protect Palestinians in the streets and in the schools and in the workplaces. They're coming under attack everywhere. You asked me about the students. They're trying to shut down Students for Justice in Palestine, the largest Palestinian student group in the country. 2 chapters they're trying to shut down in Florida. DeSantis, of course, the pig, because those people came out, the SJPs came out with statements in support of the Palestinian self-defense. They already shut down 2 of them, and they're probably going to try to do more. There are folks, this wonderful African-American, Black American young woman who was on national news. I can't remember the station. I just saw it yesterday. Who had lost a job opportunity. She had been promised a job by a law firm, I believe, and they rescinded the job offer because of her position from her college campus in support of Palestinians.
Oh my God.
And the reporter, the woman doing the interview, gave her 3 or 4 opportunities to say, do you think it was a mistake? Do you think the timing was a mistake? And she stood her ground.
Oh, good
and she
for
said
her.
the timing will never be a mistake. In fact, it wasn't just October 7th when I believed that the Palestinians have the right to defend themselves. It's been 75 years of Israeli attacks and 75 years of Israeli crimes. And yes, I'm sad and I'm angry and I'm hurt that I'm not going to have that job. But I did the principled thing and I will continue to do that forever. I mean, it was incredible. Not even from our community.
Good for her.
Good for her. Incredible. And so November 4th in D.C., be with us. USPCN will have our banners and our posters and our contingent and hundreds of people from our organization from across the country, and keep fighting to not only to stop this crisis right now, to stop this attack from the Israelis right now, to stop this murder and genocide, but to continue to support the fight for national liberation. And so I want to offer one last thing before we go. Is that all right?
Please.
I want to say something that, Palestinians have believed and probably have said in a lot of different fora for a long, long time. It doesn't get said that much in the United States because of the vicious attacks and accusations against people from my community for doing this work that we do. I don't know if you've talked to folks about what happened to us 13 years ago, but my home was raided. Other activists on Palestinian rights had been subpoenaed to a federal grand jury. We fought against that. We defended ourselves. Nobody was ever charged because we built a defense, and because international solidarity is not a crime. Supporting national liberation is not a crime. And so the essence of this struggle is this. Just like in South Africa, the whole world ultimately recognized that this was true. South Africa did not have the right to exist as a racist, white supremacist, apartheid state.
That's right.
And I believe strongly, and USPCN believes, and so many millions of people around the world believe, that Israel also does not have the right to exist as a racist, white supremacist, apartheid, Zionist state. And that's what the essence is. It is a settler colonial state of white Europeans and white Americans, U.S. residents who have come and taken land from the indigenous people And it doesn't have the right to exist as a state like that.
That's right.
And once it's dismantled, then all of the people that live there, from the river to the sea, everybody in historical Palestine, which includes Gaza, Jerusalem, the West Bank, and 1948 Palestine, called quote unquote Israel today. Everybody there can live liberated in a pluralistic, democratic society as long as that system of racism, white supremacy, and Zionism is dismantled.
So the answer is democracy and equality.
The answer is democracy, equality, and the destruction and dismantlement of a white settler colonial state.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, thank you so much, Hatem Abudayyeh, for being our guest today on FightBack Radio.
Thank you.
All right. Important words at an important time from the national chair of the United States Palestinian Community Network, Hatem Abudayyeh. And I want to encourage people. You heard the passion in his voice, and I thank Hatem for the words of wisdom, letting us know what's going on in Palestine. But also you could hear the emotion, and you could hear the intellect, the theory behind some of what he was saying too. So I think this is a very important interview, and I want to encourage, especially at this time, as the Israelis are bombing and invading Gaza, and taking even more land and killing more people, to share this episode. Get this out there. Share it through social media. Tell your friends about it. It helps. Write a review. It helps put us up the algorithms on that. If you enjoyed it, I also encourage you to like it or to subscribe and or give us 5 stars. Those are all things that'll help other people find us. But especially this interview. See if you can get it out there. If you're interested in finding out more about what's going on in Palestine or the resistance and support for the resistance here in the United States, I encourage you to go to FightBackNews.org. This is FightBack Radio is a production of FightBack News, and we encourage you to go there to get news. Also, Hatem mentioned the USPCN website, which is uspcn.org. Just another place to go look. I would say electricintifada.net. Our friends over at the Electronic Intifada, I think, do a great job of reporting on what's going on in Palestine. So those are places you can go, but don't just read about it. You're not an armchair. Maybe you are, but you don't want to just be an armchair leftist. You want to go out and make a change. The point is to change the world, right? And so there's a protest, no doubt, in your city, and you can probably find it at uspcn.net. And so go out there, take a stand and support the Palestinians. They need it now more than ever, and this is important. Also, contact your elected officials, especially your Congress people, and support the Cori Bush resolution, which Hatem was talking about. It's important that we do all that we can right now to support our the oppressed people in Palestine, our sisters and brothers, and so it's important to do that. Finally, before I sign off, as always, I want to thank the best production team around, Shane Tremley, Vince Olson, Natalie Pranis, and Dodd McColgan. And for the entire FightBack Radio team, I'm Richard Berg, saying until next time, all power to the people. And we're out. All right. I think that went good.
I think we kicked ass.
I think we did too. You were fired up, man.
Yeah, I got charged.
Let me turn this off because these editors.
Yeah, before we say some dangerous shit.
No, these guys, my buddies, they put stuff in at the end.